another option always sounds great, because the grass is always greener on the other side, right? Well, but then you get there and you're like, might not have been what I thought this was. Look, Elon's got this brilliant new idea for a third party, the America Party, and he's got enough money to make a splash at least. But I don't know if he's actually got enough money to actually win anything. Elon tweeting out, quote, by a factor of 2 to 1, you want a new political party and you shall have it. When it comes to bankrupting our country with waste and graft, we live in a one-party system, not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. Today, the America Party is formed to give you back your freedom. Now, look, this sounds great, and this is what the Republican Party was created as when the Whig Party had the conservative majority in the past, pre-Civil War. So I hit the streets actually today to ask the average people what they thought about a third party and got a lot of mixed responses. What's your take on a third political party here in America?
I think it's a good idea in principle. I don't think it's necessarily viable.
Would you support Elon Musk's third party, the America Party?
I don't think so.
Which party do you think he's taken away from most?
I think he'd take away from the Democrats, which really need change.
I think it would take away from Republicans.
I think they're both in trouble. Yeah.
I think it's not a good idea if you're talking about Elon Musk.
That's exactly what we're talking about. Do you think it would take away from Republicans or Democrats more?
Well, it's a narcissistic move, so to whoever is disaffected in either party, that will be the attraction.
Look, would I like to see a third option? In theory, maybe, I don't know. But here's the problem. Third parties almost always benefit Democrats because the base of the Democrat Party will vote exactly how they're told, whereas Republicans tend to be a little bit more free thinkers. Look, there has not been any successful campaigns outside of the two-party system since Lincoln, who was obviously the first ever elected Republican who broke away from the Whig Party, and that was his second time running for president. Since then, there hasn't been any success in this. They have succeeded in spoiling the party that they sought to break away from or were disenfranchised by, though, like Elon. And there's more than half a dozen examples of this, but some of the more prominent ones are 1912. Theodore Roosevelt ran on the Progressive Party ticket, won 27.4% of the popular vote, 88 electoral votes, 6 states. He was unique in that he was a former president, but this was the most successful third-party bid. But he split the Republican vote and gave us Woodrow Wilson that arguably led to the Great Depression. So thanks, Teddy. And the next most unsuccessful one was 1992, Ross Perot, who ran as an independent, getting almost 19% of the popular vote, the highest for an independent since Roosevelt in 1912, but he won 0 electoral votes. But exit polls even showed that if people thought he could have won, they would have voted for him. And he also ran with a lot of his own money, kind of like Elon would do. Well, he wouldn't be running because he wasn't born here, but you get my point. This is the one, though, that we should be most worried about because I think he, most like Elon, is in this whole economic outlook, rigid deficit reduction, uncompromising on a lot of issues and things like that, much like Elon. And what happened with Ross Perot? We got Bill Clinton. However, because of Newt Gingrich as Speaker of the House, there was gridlock. Obviously, Newt Gingrich being a Republican. Because of that referendum from Ross Perot about the rigid budgets, we did balance the budget, which looks at today as pretty much infeasible. Look, here's my point. This is stupid. Elon used to be the darling of the left. Then he switched over to Trump, and we all loved him for it. Then they had this fallout, so now he's in some sort of no man's land. Then if he does this, he might get a few Republicans like, I don't know, George Conway or something weird, someone else from the Lincoln Project or something. But I don't think he's going to get any Democrats, which means he could offset J.D. Vance in the next election cycle potentially. This is the psyche, though, of Elon Musk. And to a degree, look, I kind of sympathize. At least I understand where he's coming from. He slept on a floor for 100 days straight, working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week to cut government spending. And then this big, beautiful bill comes along, and which raises the debt ceiling and has a bunch of crazy spending in it. Some of which we needed, but a lot of it we don't, like the $85 million to move a decades-old space shuttle down to Texas. But we know Elon is a bit on the spectrum, okay? He self-admitted he has Asperger's, which can drive impulse, but his impulse could actually spend billions of dollars and not even bat an eye, by the way. That's a huge amount of money in politics, considering Donald Trump only spent $1 billion on his campaign, tops, and that's with outside money, too. And this could legitimately end up with AOC being president, if you can imagine that. Just simply because there's not enough free thinkers on the left. And through a plurality, they'll just vote party lines. And then there we are. You got Jasmine Crockett and AOC. Look, I'm with Scott Jennings on this one.
It's harder than it looks to start a political party. We'll see where they go with it. My humble advice to Elon, who I admire very much, actually, is that you may be dividing the forces of people who want to save Western civilization to the benefit of the people who don't. And so to the extent that this effort would divide conservatives and Republicans against each other, that would be helpful.
He's right. But even Trump weighed in on this further.
I think it's ridiculous to start a third party. We have a tremendous success with the Republican Party. The Democrats have lost their way, but it's always been a two-party system. And I think starting a third party just adds to confusion. It really seems to have been developed for two parties. Third parties have never worked. So he can have fun with it, but I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, look, to some extent, I agree with Elon's premise on this, but I don't agree with him starting a third party. Look, I'm someone who believes that taxation is theft and that the 16th Amendment was the worst thing this country has seen since slavery. I have disdain for government spending and handouts. Look, I cringe when I drive through D.C. seeing the amount of buildings with these huge white columns funded by the government stealing 50% of my paycheck. I am so frustrated that no matter who I vote for, the national debt keeps growing and they keep promising to not do that. But we have to look at the single fact that this Trump term is the first time since Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich that we've legitimately shrunk the federal government. Donald Trump has eliminated, fired, or shut down like 250,000 employees, government employees. Sure, would I like 5 times that many? Yeah, but I'm probably not going to get it. But we better get more, because in passing this giant bill that we just passed, a lot of things were taken out of it by Senate, by the Congress, that we were promised would be in there, and they weren't there. And we're not going to forget about this. This big, beautiful bill was one step for getting this country on the right track. One step. And the big thing was tax cuts. Look, I could find a way to understand some raise in the debt ceiling if it accompanies greater tax cuts that Trump is promising now, like no income taxes at all for people under $200,000. That would be swell. But this is the bigger problem. Because the House and the Senate did not fully execute Trump's agenda, there's not enough fiscal hawks out there to throw or there are enough, actually, I should say, to throw the next presidential election to a Democrat if Elon goes through with this with all of his money. And that's what I worry about. Now, look, when it comes to the House, I don't care. Third party yourself to kingdom come for all I care, Elon. But I'll leave you with this. If you think Elon Musk is the answer, keep in mind, he voted for Barack Obama, who raised the debt ceiling 11 times, at least 11 times. He's been historically anti-gun and doesn't always play well with others, even on the same side as you're seeing now. And like Jennings said, I have a great deal of respect for him. I think he's a genius. But he does wield a massive amount of power that can be scary.
He loves the Constitution. He fights for what's right. He hates the bad guys. He's a freedom warrior. He's your freedom warrior. Watch Carl Higbie every weekday on Newsmax.